You ever wonder how a world-class quantum physicist, someone whose life is built on evidence and logic, could also be a person of deep Christian faith? It seems like a paradox, right? Well, for one incredible mind, John Polkinghorne, it wasn't a contradiction at all. It was all part of the same single quest for truth. So here's the big question. Can you actually test faith like it's a science experiment? Can you put ancient beliefs under a microscope and treat them with the same kind of rigor you'd find in a physics lab? I think most of us would probably say, no way. But John Polkinghorne? He'd say, absolutely. And this is where his story gets really fascinating. See, Polkinghorne didn't think faith was some kind of blind leap in the dark. He took one of the oldest, most foundational statements of Christian belief, the Nicene Creed, which is nearly 1,700 years old, and he decided to treat it not as a list of rules you just have to accept, but as a series of hypotheses that needed to be investigated. His laboratory wasn't full of beakers and particle accelerators. It was history, human experience, and reason itself. So let's dive into this investigation. Think of it this way. Our lead investigator is John Polkinghorne, and the case file he's cracking open? The Nicene Creed. But he's not approaching it as a preacher, he's approaching it as a scientist. Okay, this slide right here basically sums up his entire method. Polkinghorne said nope to what he called top-down faith. That's where you start with the answer, the dogma, and then you spend your time trying to make all the evidence fit. As a physicist, he was a bottom-up thinker. You start with the data, the things you can observe, the evidence, and you see where it leads you. You build your way up to a conclusion. It's literally the scientific method, just applied to theology. Now, the philosophical idea that lets him bridge these two seemingly separate worlds is called critical realism, and this is absolutely key to understanding him. He believed that both science and theology are just human attempts, fallible, probably incomplete models that are trying to describe one single objective reality. They aren't enemies fighting each other. They're more like two different maps of the exact same territory, each one giving you a unique and valuable perspective. All right, let's start the investigation. We'll go right to the first and biggest claim in the Creed. We believe in one God, maker of heaven and earth. So how on earth does a bottom-up, evidence-first thinker even begin to tackle that? Well, he didn't go looking for some kind of absolute 100% proof, because honestly, science rarely deals in absolute proofs anyway. Instead, he acted like a detective. He searched for clues, for data points, for what he liked to call signals that might suggest a creator is the most logical explanation for the universe we find ourselves in. And he zeroed in on 4 of these key signals. First, just how deeply understandable the universe is. I mean, why should it follow these elegant, beautiful mathematical laws? Why isn't it just chaos? Second, the mind-blowing fine-tuning of the universe. The fact that all these physical constants are balanced on a razor's edge just so life like us could exist. Third, this universal sense of morality, that deep-down feeling of right and wrong that you find across cultures. And finally, the stubborn, unshakable persistence of human hope, even when things look bleak. To him, these were all pieces of data that demanded an explanation. And here's the crucial takeaway from that first part. Polkinghorne concluded that belief in a creator God wasn't something you prove like a math equation. Instead, to use the language of science, it was an inference to the best explanation. It's the theory that just does the best job of making sense of all that data we just looked at. Okay, but what about the really core claims of Christianity? The stuff that's a lot harder for a modern scientific mind to wrap its head around? Well, he took the exact same bottom-up, evidence-based approach to the person of Jesus. And, yes, even the claim of the resurrection. So, when the Creed calls Jesus true God from true God, Polkinghorne argued this wasn't some myth that got tacked on centuries later. He saw it as a conclusion the first followers were forced to make based on the evidence they had. The historical person of Jesus, his incredible authority, his staggering impact, and the consistent story they all told about him. For them, just calling him a good teacher or a prophet simply wasn't a powerful enough explanation for the reality they had encountered. And then we get to the resurrection. He didn't just hang his hat on a single miracle story. He built a case using converging lines of historical evidence. It's not just one thing, it's how they all fit together. You've got the empty tomb, you've got multiple separate accounts of people seeing Jesus afterward. Then, and this is huge, you have the radical, undeniable transformation of the disciples. They went from a terrified group hiding in a locked room to bold leaders willing to die for their belief. And finally, the sudden, explosive rise of a new religion centered on a resurrected savior. He argued that when you take all four of those historical facts together, the bodily resurrection is actually the simplest theory that explains everything. So, having examined all the evidence for a creator and for the central claims about Christ, Polkinghorne steps back to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. What's the final verdict from our physicist's investigation into faith? And this is just so cool. Check out how his mind worked. He even found a way to make the resurrection conceptually plausible for a physicist. He didn't believe in some simple ghost in a machine. Instead, he suggested that a person is fundamentally an information-bearing pattern. At death, that unique pattern is saved, held in the memory of God. And in the resurrection, it's re-embodied in a new form of matter. It's a mind-bending blend of physics, information theory, and theology. So his ultimate conclusion, in his own words, is really powerful. After going through the creed, clause by clause, he found that it wasn't just a random collection of beliefs. He argued that it actually provided a coherent, powerful, and intellectually satisfying explanation for all of reality, one that he, as a scientist, could honestly and rationally get behind. So we'll leave you with this thought. Polkinghorne's entire journey shows us that for the biggest questions about meaning, morality, purpose, things science just isn't designed to answer, we all end up making an inference to the best explanation. His criteria were things like coherence and explanatory power. So the final question is, what are yours?